The way we make movies keeps changing, whether it's silent to sound or black and white to color, or whether we go from film to digital. I mean, but the one thing that doesn't change, or at least it seems to me, is 3D. That's about the effect I get when I watch it. I'm not a big fan of it, but then all of a sudden I meet this guy, and he is into 3D like you wouldn't believe. I mean, this guy makes it his business. He loves it so much. Somehow he landed David Cronenberg's producer to produce his first film. So in just a few moments, we're going to meet this guy. His name is James Stewart. I'm Thom Ernst, and this is Making Movies the Canadian way. Welcome to Making Movies. I'm Thom Ernst. Our guest today is someone who, when I first met him, I think maybe we had a little bit of let's say, a conflict. In that I openly told him that I wasn't a fan of 3D movies, but James Stewart, who is sitting with me today, is not only a fan of 3D movies, but an expert in the field, and was able to sort of convince me and open my eyes, as it were, to this changing phenomena. But because 3D has been around for so long, James, and it seems like it's gone in spits and spurts and never really caught on. Now, 3D seems to be happening a lot in cinema. But what's changed? It's certainly not people's attitude about it sometimes.
No, I think what's changed is it became digital. So it became a lot easier to make, a lot easier to project, and a lot easier to make it into a perfect experience. So we saw this huge boom in cinema, with Avatar and post-Avatar for about 5 years. It's still really popular in cinema. Didn't really take off on television because people apparently don't like wearing glasses at home. I wear funny glasses all the time, so I don't have a sensibility for that. But it's still really popular, like in the cinema in the world, cinema, China, around the world. It's very popular. The latest Star Wars had 70% advanced ticket sales were 3D, and there's 3 or more of those coming up. There's 3 more Avatars coming up. There's, all the big animated films are in 3D, and all the action films, all the Marvel comic book action films are in 3D. So it's still very popular in cinema, and now that VR is taking off, it's really sort of the next generation of experiencing 3D storytelling.
I mean, it is interesting because one of the things that I've learned through talking with you, and despite the fact that I openly admitted at that time that 3D wasn't my favorite, you invited me to chair a discussion with all these 3D filmmakers. And one of the things that they were talking about is how this advancement is not only just going to help cinema, but it's also a great teaching mechanism, and it can be used in so many other different areas.
Yeah, that's right. Stereoscopic 3D is kind of how we see the world anyway. And so getting into whether it's a movie or a documentary or, music documentaries have been done in 3D. There's been some spectacular IMAX films in 3D. And it's really a natural way that we see the world. And so when I got into it, the fact that you could shoot it with digital cameras and you could do live 3D, you could do all these things that weren't possible in the 50s when it was 35 millimeter and double projectors and all this kind of very complicated analog equipment. When it became digital, it became a very easy art form to do perfectly. And so you had artists like Wim Wenders and Werner Herzog and Jean-Luc Godard making 3D films, and in some ways coming back to cinema because they were excited about 3D films. Ridley Scott, he wants to make every film in 3D now. And a lot of artists who were kind of, slowing down, ramping down their careers have kind of come back and are excited because 3D is a whole new language for them to explore.
Are we looking for ways, though, to get people back into the cinema, and this is one way to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There was a conspiracy by the movie industry to, keep people coming to cinema. But it's not just 3D. It's bigger screens. It's cushy seats. It's better food. It's no cell phones in the movie. There's all kinds of way that the cinema business is trying to keep their business going, because they're obviously fighting Netflix and they're fighting phones and content on your phone and all these double screen experiences. The cinema is still a captive experience where you're going to watch a movie with a group of people. You're not going to talk. You're not going to, go get a beer. You're not going to make out on the sofa. It's a collective experience. You're going to watch a movie. So 3D and digital was, there's no question, a Hollywood push to capture the audiences and keep them in cinema for big movie releases. And also, as their industry changes, they had to keep raising ticket prices. So giving us better projection and better sound, things like Dolby Atmos with 100 speakers around you, is a spectacular way to see a movie. And 3D added to that.
Yeah, I mean, right, and these are things that you can't get at home, and you need to go out and see them. But I mean, is the technology going to continue to advance? I mean, at what point? I think everybody is thinking about space Star Trek 9 or whatever that is, where you actually have a hologram and you're right inside the film. I mean, how close are we to that?
Well, you could do it right now. But you probably couldn't do it on any scale. But VR is happening now on a fairly large scale.
What's VR, by the way?
Virtual reality. So you have an Oculus Rift type headset on, and it allows you to be in the story, and that's happening in a very big way this year. The interesting thing is, in the end, we want to tell stories and we want to captivate people and captivate an audience. So how you do it, it doesn't really matter. The technology is going to keep changing faster and faster every year. If you look at the way our smartphones or our cell phones have gone from being these clunky telephones to what they are now, you wouldn't call it a telephone anymore, because your whole life is there, and there's apps and there's GPS and tracking, and you have a good part of your life is now on your mobile device. Technology changes so fast. So will we be watching holographic movies in our living rooms in front of us? Maybe, if that makes sense, if that's a good storytelling tool. Not everything is a good storytelling tool, but 3D turned out to be a really great storytelling tool, as is surround sound, and as is color, and as is VR is yet to be, the story is yet to be told, but VR is a very compelling way to tell a story as well. So in answer to your question, will we be looking at holographic movies? Maybe. No, maybe they'll be great, maybe they'll suck. If they suck, we won't. If they're great, we'll go, well, that's a new way to experience storytelling.
Well, if they suck, I mean, there's bound to be some that will and some that won't. I mean, there's no difference with 3D, but I mean, they're taking movies that weren't in 3D and making them into 3D. So the technology seems to have advanced in some way. But there are still enough people, though, that are skeptical about the...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not everybody likes everything. The haters are going to hate, right? So there's good films that are in black and white, and there's good films that are in color, and there's great films that are in 3D. Mm-hmm. And there's terrible films in all those different media. So, is it good? Is it bad? It's up to the filmmaker, really.
I mean, the phenomenon of 3D has really taken off. I mean, if you haven't seen this month's edition of Playback magazine, there on the cover is Zorro wearing a VR helmet. I mean, poor Zorro. Zorro, do you see yourself? He's fine. I think Zorro's interested in the audience more than the magazine at this point.
He can actually herd sheep in Scotland with a virtual reality set on.
Wait a minute. There's actually a use for this. This isn't just like a funny picture. You could herd sheep in Scotland.
That's right.
Trini.
That's right.
Well, that's pretty good. He seems to be looking at something particularly fascinating. You're a filmmaker yourself, and you're obviously doing your film Foxed, which started off as an award-winning short film.
Yes, that's right.
And now it's going to become a feature film. How's that coming? I mean, it's been in the making for a little while now.
Yeah, it's coming along good. We're still in the middle of financing, but the script is in good shape, and we're hoping to get it going this year. Fox is the story of Emily, who has been kidnapped by the foxes and forced to work in the mines underneath the village, and she has to gather the kids and storm her way back and take the village back from the foxes, who are impersonating all the children in the eyes of the parents. It's going to be in 3D, it's going to be in VR, it's going to be on many platforms.
Now, there are people that have taken an interest in this, and Martin Katz is one of them, who is David Cronenberg's producer. How did Martin Katz get involved?
Well, he saw the short film and he was very captivated by the characters and the story, and we got together and we hit it off, and he said, you know what, I can finance this film, let's do it.
Wow, and then he approached you? Or, yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool, because I mean, you were going ahead with this project anyway. You created the figures, and I've seen them, and you shot the short. The short did very well at film festivals. So even without Martin Katz, this would have happened.
Yeah, it's just a matter of what kind of scale it would happen, probably. You know, we're going to try to make it as a Hollywood animated film. Without him, it would be a smaller scale. It'd be more of a Canadian, indie film. But the idea was always to make a great 3D stop motion film. So when I made the short, it's sort of one of the rare times in your life when you do something and it just catches fire. Like we made this little short film, 3-minute animated film. We did it with a bunch of friends on a very low budget, and it just took off. And it's played at 100 film festivals. It won 7 awards. It was #1 on iTunes when it was launched.
Yes.
We put it on Vimeo, got 100,000 views in the first 4 days. So it just takes off. People really like it, and as much as I had to do with making it, the character Emily has a fan base, and we have followers on Twitter that love hearing about her and love getting updates. And
does Emily have her own Twitter account?
no, she doesn't. No,
Okay.
she's not allowed to.
Oh, she's not. She's too young. Zorro does. Zorro does have his own Twitter account. Oh, why do you keep? I thought that would have been great. Poor Zorro, you need your own Twitter account. Just for people who don't know about Foxed, it is a great small animation, a short animation. I don't want to say too much, but about a young girl who gets kidnapped and is trying to make her way back into the real world. I mean, it begs to be told as a bigger story. And certainly Martin isn't the first person that approached you on this.
Yeah, no, I think when it played on the festival circuit, a lot of people were very interested in it, a lot of animation studios, because it is a story that's captivated people. It is about girl power. It's about a young girl who's in the feature film, her brother is kidnapped and she goes and saves him. They both end up being held captive by these mysterious foxes who are shapeshifters, and the plot of the story is they have to collectively with the other kids in the village take back the village. So it's something that just really resonated, and I went to some film festivals with it, and I saw audiences watch it, and kids and adults and girls and all kinds of different demographic groups just fell in love with Emily and really love the character, the way she's designed, and the plight of her when she's in the story. She feels abandoned. She feels like her parents are not listening to her. That's something people can relate to, certainly when they're growing up.
Mm-hmm. Your company, Geneva, is it Geneva Films? Yeah. Geneva Films, you've worked, you mentioned Werner Herzog, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, I believe is the film. How do you get to connect with these people? Like, I mean, there must be other people doing what you do in the States, in Europe, but somehow Werner Herzog connected with you.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I said Foxed was a moment that just kind of took fire. And when I got into 3D, I got in very early. And so
I'm just going to say goodbye to Zorro. Bye, Zorro.
Thank you. Good night, Zorro.
Yeah.
He's on his 15. When I got into 3D, it was very early. So I was in, I knew how to do it when Avatar happened and took off. So I really benefited from being an early adopter to 3D and being a director working in 3D. So I got invited to speak at the TED conference. I did a lot of speaking about 3D storytelling and around the world, and people would invite me to events, and so I got a bit of a reputation of the guy, if you want to do 3D, give the guy a call. And so the Herzog film, even though it was shot in Europe, was produced out of LA. And so the producers had heard of me, and they were showing their film at TIFF, and they said, let's call this guy up and we'll show him the film. This was before it played at TIFF. It was about a month before. And they said, we're world premiering our film at TIFF, and you know, can you look at it? We're just finishing the 3D. So I gave them some advice, and we showed it at TIFF, and it was very successful. And then they gave me sort of the whole film, and I redid it for the theatrical release. And it premiered in Berlin, and then it had a very successful release for an independent film, because it's Werner, and because it's 3D, and it's because it's the 30,000-year-old cave paintings, the world's oldest cave paintings. And it just, they found me just because they had heard of me, and I guess we probably had a mutual connection. Somebody else I'd worked with in LA said, "Oh yeah, we know James, call him."
Yeah.
And they were happy to let me get involved, and it was a great project.
Yeah, but I have to ask you what the fascination really is with you and 3D. Is it because, like, were you talking about the caves and the drawings? It almost sounded like you were saying that those are prime for a 3D camera. Is it because there's a depth, a feeling that you're in the movie, that you can touch it? Yeah. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, every 3D experience is different, but in the case of Cave of Forgotten Dreams, I used to say, what is an example of something that should never be shot in 3D? And I would say, well, something that's on the wall, because it's flat. These caves are not flat. They move in and out. They have crevices. They have stalagmites and stalactites, and there's all this very interesting geography in the caves. And the painting, 30,000-year-old paintings of animals, bears, lions, used the shapes of the caves for the art.
Right.
And so when you see it in 3D, it's very different than the way you would see it in 2D. When you see it in 3D, and Werner in the film has a very long passage, about 10 minutes towards the end of the film, where he stops talking and there's just music playing, and you feel like you're actually in the caves. And the camera just pans around and lets you really experience these caves. And in 2D, it's a different experience. In 3D, you feel like you are actually in these caves, like you could reach out and touch them. And no one will ever be allowed to be in the caves. So it's a very important experience because it's so delicate. There's footprints of prehistoric animals in the dirt, so you can't walk around in these caves.
So how did your dog get in there?
Well, he's the only person who's been allowed in there to film in the caves, and there was a very small catwalk, and everybody had to stay on this catwalk because literally you couldn't put your Nike footprint there's footprints that have been there for 30,000 years, and there's an area, a little spot where where somebody had butted out their torch 30,000 years ago. So you can't, and no one has touched it. So because of the sensitivity of the cave for heat and humidity, they don't let anybody in it. So experiencing it in 3D was absolutely phenomenal. And you do feel like you're actually visiting these caves.
Well, there's the exception I was talking about, where it gets beyond storytelling and it actually becomes a tool for something else. I mean, you were talking about at this conference for medical reasons and doctors and things like that. So it does sort of change the whole landscape of so many things, not just storytelling.
Yeah. Well, and so 3D, kind of the way we see the world with our two eyes, allows you to do so much more than if you only have one eye, if you don't see depth. So surgeons, of course, are using stereoscopic monitoring like VR headsets to do operations. And the way they used to do, operations is they would do CT scans. MRI, or it's kind of like a deck of cards. They'd go up and down this way, they go up and down this way, up and down this way. They just flick through the deck of cards. Now in 3D, they can actually take a scan of your retina or your heart, and they can look at it in 3D. They can look inside it. They can look around. They don't have to do it in such an analog way anymore. Wow. So it's obviously a tool for that. But I'm more excited as a visual tool.
Well, I am too. I mean, when I think about how it could change a storytelling app completely, just to get to like the meat of it, horror films would change completely if you were able to do this in 3D the way I imagine it, when you're kind of surrounded by all of this.
Well, and there have been a lot of horror films done in 3D. Again. blood splatter at the camera and all kinds of great things flying at you is something people enjoy in 3D. It's not necessarily the best way to tell a story in 3D, but in a horror film, in 2D, things are coming at you anyway. So, and again, there's been some great 3D horror films, and there's been some terrible 3D horror films, in the same way that they're good or bad in 2D.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also fascinating too, just a little bit of history of 3D. And you talked about you can't really see 3D with one eye, or the perspective changes. One of the pioneers of 3D filmmaking, Andre Toth, only had one eye.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of filmmakers who were into 3D early on couldn't see 3D.
But that's almost unexplainable, like how that can happen.
Yeah, and I think what they did is they had a DP, a director of photography, who understood 3D, and certainly the editor understood it, and it was just by chance that they, couldn't see 3D, and they were tasked with making a 3D film.
Okay, but it was an effect at one time. 3D was just for shock value, to duck, or to see if you can grab whatever was floating above your head. But then people like Martin Scorsese started to make things in 3D, and directors that you would thought, Alfred Hitchcock was the first, I guess, A-list director to make something in 3D. But then now, people that you wouldn't think were going to make things in 3D are. Yeah. So this has got to help your argument, help your case.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, when I started producing in 3D, directing in 3D, I didn't say, okay, now 3D is going to save my career. I'm doing everything in 3D. I think it was just very interesting for me, and because it became easier, I love doing it, and it's totally a great way to create visual storytelling. And the reaction I had is the exact same reaction people like Martin Scorsese had. They thought, well, I don't need to make something in 3D, until they got into it, because they are movie fans and they're visual storytelling buffs, and they saw 3D and they went, wow, that's fantastic. And so all kinds of directors, there's a whole bunch who are afraid of 3D, who just don't like 3D and for some reason. But most of the directors who worked in 3D have said, wow, this is fantastic, and they want to keep working in 3D the rest of their careers because it's amazing. And it's a fascinating way. And the thing people forget is, you shoot a film in 3D, it's also going to play in 2D. It's going to play on your phone. It's going to play on Netflix. So some of your audience who doesn't want to watch 3D, they can watch the 2D version. But it's kind of like, if I was Picasso and I decide I'm going to do a painting in color, and you say, well, I don't like color. Well, you can look at the painting in black and white if you want. That's up to you. It's not up to the artist. As an artist, we create and we put it out there, and the audience takes what they want out of it, and they interpret it the way they want. I saw that with Foxed. People interpret Emily and the themes of the film in wildly different ways, and they're all right. It's okay. It's
Isn't
okay
that
to
something you
interpret.
have to get yourself to say, though? It's okay. They're all right. Isn't it really, when you get down to it, aren't you going, no, Emily is this, and
Well, in a way you are, but as an artist, you tell your story the way you want it told, and then you give it to the audience. Mm-hmm. And in the end, you can't control what they think anyway. So you give it to them, and they can like it, they can hate it, they can say it's mine, it's the story of my life, they can say it's the story of my daughter's life, they can interpret it how they want. Because in the end, that's what art is. It's your own personal reflection of something someone else created. Mm-hmm. The artist did it to tell a story, but in the end, the audience gets to decide what their own personal story is.
Well, and this is the words they're using are different than what they used to use when they were talking about 3D. Again, it used to be effect, but now you're talking about 3D as art. Yeah. And I used to say, well, I'll watch 3D when they make A Long Day's Journey into Night into 3D, or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Well, they're doing it. Yeah. Does that change actually how we even perceive the characters then, and the story? Is there something about 3D that adds something that goes beyond what we see with our eyes?
I think it does. I think it makes it a more intimate experience. And the effect of someone leaning in which you do in 2D. The camera moves in to be closer to the actor to shoot that glorious hero close-up of, the actress with a tear in her eye. It's more compelling in 3D. It's interesting in 2D, and the acting is interesting in 2D, and the lighting is interesting, and it's really about the acting. Mm-hmm. But in 3D, it's just that much more compelling, in the way that it's more compelling for me to be here with you in the studio. We're talking in 3D. We can see that we're both here in the room. If you're on Skype, it's a bit different. I'd be on my phone, and I'd be, you'd be answering fan mail while I'm talking. Whereas this is more intimate. It's a much more compelling way to communicate with someone.
It's fascinating, and I have been able to sort of change my point of view of 3D. But where will it be in, like, say, 20 years from now? We talked about technology continues to change.
Yeah, it's very hard to say where cinema will be. Where will Netflix be in 20 years? Like, where will Netflix be in 3 years? Everything is changing so fast. I know what's happening in the next year is Netflix is going to keep spending money and going after the movie industry, and VR is going to take off, and everybody will try it once. Whether it expands and is the next platform the way Facebook seems to think it is, it's hard to say. They need to sell 100 million VR headsets before it has the kind of penetration that a smartphone has. But Samsung and these companies, they think it's the next platform. Facebook thinks it's the next platform after the smartphone. So, we'll see. That's out of my hands. I'm going to tell stories and use it to create content for my own career and my own development, and it's hard to say where, like, 20 years. Where is the medical industry going to be in 20 years? We may have humans who live forever. We may be completely 3D printed all our new organs in 20 years. That's a long time, right? So will the cinema business exist in 20 years? It's hard to say. Look at where it's gone in the last 5 years. It's gone bigger and better and more luxurious, and it might be $200 a ticket for opening night. Who knows? But I'll make sure it's spectacular and sounds good, and it'll be in 3D, and it'll be worth it.
Well, I think it's great that you're telling your story in 3D, and I don't actually think there was any choice in your mind then that this is the only way to do it. But what were you doing prior to this? Like, were you making 2D movies? Did you start? When did the 3D interest kick in?
Well, I've been very fortunate. My day-to-day job is commercials, so I have been lucky and fortunate to work on very expensive commercials, primarily for the auto industry, for car companies. And I did a project in Japan in 1998, which was in digital. So this was a brand new platform. People were shooting videotape, but this was high definition, okay, which is very normal now. It's on our phone. But in 1998, it was leading edge technology, high definition, on a high definition TV, very expensive, very complicated new way of filming and editing. And I was over in Japan, and I was very excited. This was one of the first HD projects that anybody on the planet had ever done. You could only edit in Los Angeles and Tokyo, and we did both. And the guys there at NHK, like the CBC of Japan, said, well, if you think HD is cool, come in the next room to our theater, we'll show you 3D HD. So they'd been shooting digital 3D before anybody. They shot some tests at the Nagano Olympics. And I was like, wow, that's unbelievable. And at that moment, I knew if you can shoot live 3D, you could do sports, music, documentaries, TV dramas, you could do movies, you could do everything. Because suddenly it's not some archaic double system and 2 projectors and films out of sync and colored glasses. It's digital, it's polarized glasses. It's a fantastic way to experience something that's completely unlike 2D. So years later, in 2004, this is still 5 years before Avatar, I was back in Japan doing another project, and we pitched them digital 3D. Let's do digital 3D. We know that it can be done. We'll do something fantastic. And this was Toyota, and they said, yeah, go for it. This sounds great. So I got together with a bunch of guys in LA who had their first camera system. The company became Reality Digital. They shot Super Bowl. They shot the U2 film. They shot The Hobbit, The Martian, pretty well every great 3D film you've ever seen in the last 10 years. This was their very first rig, and they cobbled it together, and they brought it up to Toronto, and we shot this spot for Toyota. And that kind of got me in. And that was, so I went from digital to 3D, and then I watched the whole industry, the movie industry particularly, go digital, HD, and now it's 4K and beyond. Then it went, because Avatar was coming up and it was in digital 3D and the cinemas couldn't see it, and if they didn't have digital, that kind of forced them all to go digital, and then by definition digital 3D. And this whole thing just ramped, and I just kind of hung on.
But that's a huge risk. I mean, maybe not because it's James Cameron involved in the Avatar, but to say, well, we got this movie that you can't show unless you buy yourself new equipment and revamp your entire. I mean, it was very bold. Well, that's James Cameron.
We all thought they were nuts. George Lucas tried to do that. Remember with the shot on digital Star Wars?
Yes.
He said, "Oh, it's only going to be in digital cinemas. You got to be digital," and they all kind of went, "Eh." They didn't do it. But when James Cameron said it, they all thought, and I thought, well, the film will be popular. It's James Cameron, but it's never going to be like Titanic. That's impossible to do that again. And then it just, I met James Cameron at one of the conferences, and he was very humble, briefly, and right before Avatar came out, he was like crossing his fingers. Nobody had ever made a 3D film that was 3 hours long. IMAX films had been 40 minutes, right? People said, you can't watch a 2-hour movie in 3D, your eyes will hurt. Well, until you watched a 2-hour movie and your eyes didn't hurt. So he put this film out, and then it opened okay, and then he said, famously, he said, it's not about the first weekend, it's about the second weekend. And then it just started to chug, and we all know what happened. It just chugged and chugged, and it just, it did over $2 billion, almost $3 billion.
Despite what the critical response to it, which wasn't entirely positive.
Yeah, but I mean, that comes down to the filmmaking and the writing and the regular 2D gimmicks that we use. But I think in hindsight, the movie industry, if they had acted faster, the film would have even done more, because they didn't have that many 3D screens when it came out. When films were coming out in 2009, there was not that many screens. There was 900, then there was 1,500, then there was 2,000. Now there's 18,000 3D screens in North America. So opening Avatar on 18,000 screens in 3D, like the way they did with Star Wars, it wasn't 18,000 3D, but it would have done even more.
Wow.
But they couldn't change over the cinemas fast enough. And in a way, I don't think they believed that it was really going to happen. I mean, nobody did. Now, in hindsight, of course, James Cameron knew it, because he makes films that people see 4 times.
Yeah.
Who knew? I don't know how he does that, but he does it very well.
So how many new filmmakers or young filmmakers or any kind of filmmaker approach you and say, I kind of want to, I want to take up the torch for this. I want to champion 3D. Is there a lot of people?
Yeah. A lot of people are interested in 3D now. VR, VR is actually a 3D experience. So if you understand how to create 3D, you understand how to create VR, and it's the same thing. It's just a 360 version of 3D, which allows you to look around and experience it with your head tracking. You can look around the room like you're actually there, instead of just looking at a flat screen. But yeah, people are very interested in VR and 3D by association.
Well, I think also that we've heard about it for so long. Sort of like those jetpacks we're supposed to have. We're all waiting to watch movies with VR. I actually had the opportunity at one of your conferences to check it out, and it is amazing. But I don't know how you can work a story around it, because would it become then, and you may not be able to answer this, but when would it become then the choice of the person viewing to how the story goes? Almost like in a computer, if I want to turn this direction to see where the action is here, do I want to turn in this direction?
Well, I think VR storytelling has not been defined yet, and probably won't be for a few years. But there's a bunch of different ways that I think VR storytelling works. Certainly it's not a game. So it's not a first-person shooter where you're just looking around and shooting. That's a game. That's not storytelling in a film type of way. And it's not really just about looking around the room going, wow, this is in 3D, because that gets old after about 10 seconds. You go, okay, it's in 3D, but what's next? I think, I don't know if you've seen the play Sleep No More, and it's a play in New York. And what happens is all the actors take off and go to different rooms, and the audience has to chase them. So what happens is, as a writer, as a filmmaker, you create a story that has many paths, but they all come back to the same story. So it doesn't matter which path your audience goes down. They're going to have clues here. They're going to have a story here. She had an affair with him. He got murdered. There's all kinds of different stories that go on, but the audience still gets the whole story. And I think that's the essence of VR. So even though with a VR headset, I can go through this door and go down this path, and I can experience the story one way, that might be different from somebody else. It's very different timing, different location, but we're still going to get the story. And I think that's really what happens with VR, is you're going to have a personal experience. You're not the storyteller. The audience will not be telling their own story, because most of the audience is not a good storyteller. You still want to direct them and tell your story as a filmmaker. But the way that they interpret your story is nonlinear, and they eventually come back to, the end, if there is an end to your story.
So there's still...
And I think that's where VR will go. It's not gaming, it's not filmmaking, it's something else.
And so we can look forward to seeing Fox at any time. Is there a scheduled time for it to be released?
We're hoping to get into production this year, and then a year later it's done. So we're going to do simultaneously do a VR experience as well. So it's shot on small sets with small puppets, and it'll be shot in 360 at the same time as it's shot sort of for the linear flat version.
Thank you so much for changing me from a 2D film viewer and becoming a 3D film viewer, and enjoying it very much. So if you have a chance, check out this month's Playback magazine. You'll see James Stewart on the cover along with his dog Zorro, who is herding sheep, I think, in Ireland with his VR mask on. Remember, this is Making Movies, and keep making movies because it is the Canadian thing to do. I'm Thom Ernst. Thank you.